David, shepherd, psalmist, and king, after God's heart. We see this man who is one who continually pursues after God and his ways. So we're going to be looking at him further tonight. And we've looked at him as a shepherd. We've looked at him as a psalmist. Tonight, we're going to be seeing him finally as king. But there's some events that need to take place before that occurs. So let's begin looking at 1 Samuel chapter 31. Chapter 31. Let's take it from verses 1 through 7.
Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them.
A sad and sorry day for Israel when the king dies. So even though this was an enemy of David's, still, it was not a good day for Israel. Let's keep in mind the sequence of events that have been taking place to get a little bit of an idea of the timeline that's going on here. Does anybody remember how events are taking place? I guess we really only have a couple of people that were here from last week. So unless you tuned in online and checked out what was there, you may be at a disadvantage. Anybody remember how things are going? Let's have a look back. You remember?
Not very specific, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Not very specific. We just basically want to see how things are transpiring to get to this point right here. All right, so we've got, let's come back to chapter 27. We're just going to quickly recap some events that have taken place. David, he had been pursued by Saul, so then he fled to the Philistines. While he's there, Achish says that I'm going to make you my bodyguard. You'll be one of my chief bodyguards for life. Well, David looks at this, and have a look at chapter 28 now, and verse 2. So this is when, after he tells him that you and your men are to go out to fight with me, you're part of my army now. And David said to Achish, "Very well, you will know what your servant can do." And then this is where he says, "I'll make you my bodyguard for life." So when David says your servant will see you will see what your servant can do, basically he's speaking in veiled terms here. Yeah, I'll show you exactly what I can do. And because I will not lift the sword against Israel, against my own people. He would not lift the sword against Saul, the king, and he would not lift his sword against his fellow Israelites. So he's in a bit of a position here. Well, let's put that on hold for a moment. So, David is with the Philistines. One L or two? One L. That's chapter 27 and first part of chapter 28. Then we read in chapter 28 as we continue, Samuel dies, and then look at verse 4. The Philistines assembled, and they came and encamped at Shunem. Remember, we had looked at that last week. Let's have a look at the map so that we can refresh our memories here. Let's bring this up. So the Philistines are at Shunem. There's Shunem. So they're up in the Jezreel Valley, all right? So when they first come up, we discover that they are at Jezreel. So how do we know that they're, first of all, the people of Israel are in Jezreel? Let's jump ahead to chapter 29. In chapter 29, the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. So here's Jezreel. Oh, I'm sorry. Jezreel is... I'm looking at my map too far away. That's Jezreel to begin with. That first. The first one is Jezreel. So that's in accordance with chapter 29. So, chapter 29, the Israelites are in Jezreel. So the Israelites encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel, and the lords of the Philistines were passing by. And they basically say, we can't have David remain with us. So they speak to Achish and said, we're not going to permit this. He's going to turn on us. So he then tells David, go back home. And when we read the latter part of this chapter, we see that in verse 10, now get up early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you. Start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light. So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went up to Jezreel. All right, so the Israelites are in Jezreel. The Philistines are on their way to Jezreel. Then we read about David in chapter 30, that he goes back to Ziklag. Now that's further south, and we looked at that previously. We're not going to put that on the map, but that's, if you go south on the map, that's where you're going to be heading down to Ziklag in the coastal region of Israel. So he's going back to Ziklag. When he returns, he discovers that the Amalekites, you remember the Amalekites? Any connections that you're thinking of with the Amalekites? Who were they? Because we're going to see them again. The Amalekites first show up in Exodus chapter 17. When the Israelites are coming out of Egypt, the Amalekites come and attack them. And the Lord tells Moses that there will be war against you and the Amalekites throughout the generations. The Lord told Saul that he was to destroy the Amalekites back in chapter 15. And this is when Saul went and he brought back the sheep and the cattle and the king, Agag, alive. And Samuel said, why have you done this? He said, I've done everything that the word of the Lord has spoken to me. He says, no, you've not. He says, what is this sound of bleating in my ears and lowing of cattle? Yeah, right. And why have you kept the king alive? To obey is better than sacrifice. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. So he tells them, sacrifices and offerings isn't what we're looking for, what the Lord is looking for. He's looking for obedience. And so Samuel put Agag, the king of the Amalekites, to death. So here, the Amalekites have come and attacked Ziklag, the city, the town that David's been living in, takes all of the women and the children captive and all of the plunder, and David pursues, and he ends up having victory. While he's on his way to defeat the Amalekites, to overtake them, that's when chapter 28 happens. So, the Jezreel, the Israelites are there. And the Philistines are making their way. They're headed to Jezreel. Now come back to 28, chapter 28. This is, chapter 28 is the parentheses. The author is inserting it here to show us the downfall of Israel and the king. So have a look at verse 4. The Philistines assembled, and they came and encamped at Shunem. They came first of all to Jezreel, as we see here in chapter 29. Then they push Israel back, and they make their way to Shunem. So let's have a look at Shunem. Shunem's on the top, and Mount Gilboa. Saul gathered all Israel, and they camped at Gilboa. So they started off in Jezreel. They got pushed back to Mount Gilboa, the Israelites. And as the Philistines were pushing them back, they take up camp at Shunem. You recognize Shunem? What connection does Shunem have to your memory of Scripture? The Shunammite woman.
That's not yet, that's in Kings.
That's in Kings, yeah, but I was just wondering if that's just to peg this here. So it's, we haven't looked at it yet. That's just to show us that. So Elijah with a connection with the Shunammite woman. So this is to give us a bit of geographical connection with some things. So Elijah was dealing in this area. Jesus was in this area of Shunem, just to the north of this, when he came to the city or the town of Nain, just on the northern side of Shunem, just around the corner, really. And the widow of Nain was coming out of the town with a funeral procession of her only son, her only child, who has died. Of course, Jesus arrives, and he meets them as they're coming out of the town gates, and he stops them, and he raises this woman's dead son back to life. All right, so with that being the case, just to get some of our bearings that are taking place, they get pushed back now to these locations. And continuing on in chapter 28, what is it that Saul does? He consults the witch at Endor. So in order to go to Endor, look at the map one more time to get our bearings. In order to go to Endor, he had to go around the Philistine outposts to get to this woman, to seek her out as he consults the dead, or attempts in his mind that he's consulting the dead. All right, so that's our timeline established. Chapter 28, chronologically it happens after 29. They come to Shunem, Mount Gilboa. This is where the battle is going to be taking place. And then we've got the incident at Endor. So while Saul is consulting this witch, this medium, the next day he engages in battle with the Philistines. Meanwhile, back in Ziklag, David is in pursuit of the Amalekites. All right, so two battles taking place on two battlefields, two separate battlefields at the same time going on. As Saul had been consulting this witch because he wasn't really wanting the word of the Lord, David was consulting the Lord, and the Lord was answering him because David was caring for, he was longing for the word and the instruction of the Lord. Because he was a man after God's heart. Right. He was desiring the things of God. So that brings us now to chapter 31, where we started. So we backpedaled a little bit to get our context for where we are. So the Philistines, they come and they begin to attack Israel. Now remember, Saul has been on this campaign to try to annihilate, to destroy David. And he hasn't been successful. So this battle is taking place. And with Saul's position, he's weakened, he's he's not in a state to fight. And do you remember that we had seen last week that the Lord will answer according to a person's heart. If they're seeking after truth, the Lord is going to give them truth. If they don't care about the truth, rejecting it, then the Lord is going to answer them according to the iniquity of their heart, the hardness of their heart, and the idols that they have put up before their heart and their eyes, the pursuits. And sometimes that's not something that they've taken a statue. We think of idols as statues often, right? But this isn't what he's referring to. An idol can be anything that we put before God. So a God of our imagination can be an idol. What I mean by that is, have you ever heard somebody say, well, I just can't picture a God like that. I can't picture God who would send somebody to hell. I don't believe that God would do this or not do that. You know, different things that they would say, even though the Word tells us very clearly that God is this or doesn't do that. People would say, well, to me, God is like, and if it doesn't line up with the Scripture, then they've created a God of their imagination. So it's not a statue you can hold. It's not something that they have made with their hands or bought at a store, for instance. It's a God that they have shaped in their minds. And for Saul, that's what he's done. So Saul had gone after this witch, hoping to get Samuel to speak to him from beyond the grave. And God answers him. God speaks to him according to his heart and tells the news that he gets is that tomorrow you're going to die. Well, here's the next day. Saul's on the battlefield. And the events result that he is struck by an archer. He knows that he's severely wounded. So if it's not fatal yet, it's certainly going to slow him down so that the Philistines can overtake him, because he's not going to be able to be swift to run away or to engage further in battle. So he speaks to his armor bearer and tells him to do what?
Carry him away, take him home?
No. Kill him.
Oh.
Take your sword and kill. Take my sword and kill me. Well, he says, draw your sword and kill me. But the armor bearer refused to do so, which obviously so. So Saul, realizing that his armor bearer wasn't going to do this to him, to put him out of his misery, so to speak, that he drew his own sword and fell upon it. So as a result of that, Saul died on the battlefield. His armor bearer did the same thing, because he figured, if the king's not alive, then what's the point of trying to continue on? Because the Philistines, their whole pursuit, their intention is to take out not just the army, not just to beat the army, but if they can get the king, then they cut off the head, right? Which indicates how great of a risk it was for Saul to go to Endor. Do you remember the proximity to his enemies' lines? He had to go around and behind enemy lines to go to Endor.
Yeah, that's
right. He's prime target. If they can take out the king, then they've lost their commander, right? So he's taking great risk, not to hear the voice of God, but to pursue this ungodly activity, even to the point that this woman said, Saul has expelled all of the mediums, all of the witches. She remained, trying to remain incognito in a sense, but he sought her out because word gets around, right?
Yeah.
What was the result of Saul's death? We've read it. What took place? Look at verse 7.
Yeah.
What happened? How are things summarized for us here?
The Philistines came and occupied
Philistines came and occupied their towns because what happened?
Everybody died.
Well, the king died, but the rest of the army, what did they do? The rest of the people in those cities and the outlying
They
areas?
fled.
They fled.
Fled.
They're terrified. And for good reason. They have no defense now. Their king is dead. The army is in disarray. They've been defeated and they are in fear. So they don't run home. They run away. They scatter throughout the land to try to take refuge wherever they can, to try to find safety in whatever place they can find it. They have no leader.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's a sad commentary on the result of them choosing a king for themselves. As we looked at the beginning of this study, we saw it wasn't wrong so much for them to ask for a king. It was wrong for the reasons they asked for a king, right?
Right, yes.
What was the reason they asked for a king? They want to be like everybody else. We want to be like the nations around us. That was the mistake. That was the problem. And here's the end result of seeking after your own self or your own interests, or to be like everybody else. Because to be like everybody else meant that they were rejecting God. Because God called the people of Israel out and he says, I make you to be a what kind of a nation? Holy nation, which means
Set aside.
set apart, set aside. Not like everybody else, but literally unlike everybody else. But they're saying we want to be like everybody else. So God answered them according to their heart and gave them a king, which was according to, this man embodied really what their hearts were like. Looked impressive. Head and shoulders above everybody. He looked like a ruler. He looked like a king. But he was a man who pursued only after his own heart, his own desires. And this is the end result of a king like that. This is the end result of a life lived like this. The king will die and the people will scatter. And they scatter not just in that they decide, okay, there's no point remaining unified any longer. They scatter because they're terrified. They're afraid. All right, so let's take it from verse 8 and let's read down to 13.
And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, and they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in among
Gilboa.
Gilboa, and they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent into the land the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of
Ashtaroth.
and they fastened his body to the wall of
Bethshan.
Bethshalom. And when the inhabitants of the
Jabesh Gilead.
Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, and all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of
Bethshan. Yeah.
Bethshan, and came to
Jabesh.
and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tree of Jabesh, and fasted 7 days.
All right.
7 days. Okay.
Seems, Clarence, when we get you to read, we give you the big words.
It seems that never happened. I guess that's.
We'll have to shuffle things up next time.
Yeah.
Give you something a little bit easier. All right, we're going to take this off,
Yeah,
and
okay, I guess
let's
that's
see what's taking place now.
That was you, Bishop. Yeah, that's.
So-
That's the end of the chapter, end of the book.
The Philistines, they came upon Saul's body and stripped him
Yeah,
of
everything.
all of his armor,
Yeah, took his body, armor and everything off.
and his weaponry, basically anything of value they
Yeah.
took from the bodies of the slain. All right, so this is a common practice of war. They ended up going throughout the majority of the land to tell, for them, good news. When the news should be going throughout the land that the Philistines are defeated, that the Philistines are destroyed. But it's not, because flesh has been leading them. The
Right.
man of flesh has been leading. And flesh cannot have victory. Flesh only results in calamity, in death. So instead of having good news to publish throughout Israel, there's bad news. And the Philistines are publishing what they take as being good news. Look at verse 10. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth.
Yeah,
They fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan.
yeah.
Let's have a look at the map. We're going to go ahead a few maps there, Deb. Go ahead a couple more. One more map. Okay. There's Bethshan. You see Bethshan in relation to where the battlefield has been. They are on Mount Gilboa. So here's Mount Gilboa.
All right.
It's only 4 miles away from
Yeah.
Bethshan. So it's in view on a clear day. If it's a hazy day, it's not. But on a clear day, you can see Bethshan from Gilboa. You can see Gilboa from Bethshan. And they bring Saul's body.
Yeah.
Have a look here, verse 10. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan.
Yeah. Ooh.
Well, it wasn't just Saul, but his sons they took as well and did the same
Yeah.
thing. Let's just have a look at our screen once again. Notice Jabesh Gilead is circled for us. All right, we're going to be coming to Jabesh Gilead in a moment to see the inhabitants that were there that came and took Saul and his sons' bodies down from the wall of that temple. All right. Here is a map of the tribes of Israel. So we've got Manasseh, which is on the east side of the Jordan River. And this is where Jabesh Gilead is. So keep that in mind. We're going to be coming back to that in a moment. All right, that's the location for Jabesh Gilead. Now have a look so we can get a bit of an appreciation for Mount Gilboa and Bethshan. Here is Mount Gilboa. I'm going to come a bit closer. So Mount Gilboa is on the right. You see it here. And then off in the distance is Bethshan. That's an aerial shot looking, of course, that direction. And then you've got the Jordan River that runs just behind Bethshan. So it would be from the left to the right side of your screens beyond Bethshan. Let's have a look at our next picture. This is at Bethshan. Another name of Bethshan in Jesus' day was Scythopolis. This is one of the cities of the Decapolis, the Decapolis. So the 10 cities that Jesus spoke about, and he ended up ministering in the Decapolis for a period of time, and it was during when he was in the Decapolis that he fed the 4,000. Scythopolis was one of those 10 cities. As a matter of fact, it was referred to as the chief of those cities. But not the case, of course, during the time of Saul and David. But this is that same city. And these are the ruins of that city before us. And this picture is taken from the tell of Beth-shan. The tell means mound. So you've got, here's a tell. This is ground. All of this is ground. And what has happened over the centuries, you have a city that's built here and houses, and I'm just making scribbles. Okay, that's just not going to take time to make the skyline of an ancient city. But that would be one city. It comes and gets destroyed, and now you've got rubble. And then what the conquering city army would do then would be build on top of this. So now you've got other homes and stuff, and businesses and shops. And then when that gets destroyed, then now you've got another layer on top of this one, so that finally, after hundreds of years, you've got what is known as a tell. All right, it's a mound. So you've got layers upon layers upon layers of cities or generations of civilizations, if you will. So at Beth-shan, this is taken from, that picture is taken from the top of the tell of Beth-shan. So ancient Beth-shan is what, if you were the one behind this camera, you're standing on top of numerous layers of that city, built one on top of the other over hundreds of years, thousands of years. All right, that makes sense? We're going to see that tell in just a moment. But this is that looking over the ruins of the city that was the Sakatha Beth-shan. Let's keep it at Beth-shan. Yeah. So looking at Beth-shan, but we're calling it Scythopolis because that's what this city is we're looking at. The Romans, during the time of Jesus, they came and built this city up, and now this is the ruins of that city. Now, in that ruins of the city, looking back, that is the tell of Beth-shan. That is the location where this temple of Ashtaroth was located, and where the Philistines had nailed the bodies of Saul and his sons in that temple. And then the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead came to rescue or to retrieve those bodies. All right. What's significant about the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead coming and rescuing these bodies, retrieving these bodies? Pardon me? They weren't scared of the Philistines. Okay? What else do we know about the people of Jabesh-Gilead? They felt, in a sense, indebted to Saul. Why? Have a look back at chapter 11.
Is there an aspect of duty and honor for their nation because Saul was dead and they had his remains and they were making a mockery of it? Is there an aspect of retrieving that and shutting down this mockery?
That is certainly one part of it, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, no doubt about it, that the very reason they're doing this is to mock Saul and all of Israel, and not only Saul and Israel, but also, and moreover, the God of Israel. Because where did they pin their bodies? To the walls of their pagan temple, which was the place of their God. So in a sense, they were saying, our God is stronger than your God. Our God's bigger than your God. They were wrong. They sure were.
They're going to find that out here.
That's right. Let's keep going. But yeah, they were wrong. But nevertheless, this is what they were doing. Okay, so we got, yeah, they're going to retrieve these bodies so that they can put an end to this mockery, to the blasphemy against God. But why the people of Jabesh-Gilead? So are we at chapter 11?
Yeah.
So just taking a perusal over that. Anybody know what, pardon me?
Where?
Chapter 11?
Of what?
1 Samuel.
Oh, going back.
Yep.
Way back. All right.
Saul had come to their defense when they were threatened by the Ammonites.
So they,
They remembered that.
yeah, so one of the first events that we read about Saul after he becomes king is that the people of Jabesh Gilead were being given an ultimatum by the Ammonites. Basically, serve us or we're going to kill you. But if you serve us, if you choose not being killed, then, so if you choose to serve us, here are the conditions. We're going to poke out or pluck out your right eye or gouge it out. So we're going to make you blind in your right eye, and thereby you'll be, you're not going to be able to fight. Your peripheral vision is off. Your depth perception is off. So you're not going to be good to fight. So you're not going to be a threat to us as a whole, as a people group. So Saul, he rises up in the beginning years of his kingship. And look at verse 6. What happens? The Spirit of God,
Came upon him in power,
so say it loud, came upon him in power, and what did he do?
and he burned with anger.
Right.
He took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messenger through Israel, proclaiming, "This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel."
And so people gathered together. This is one of the unifying battles in the early days of Saul's kingdom. And as a result, Saul was victorious. So we see in verse 11 that they came into the midst of the camp in the morning of the Ammonites, struck them down until the heat of the day, and those who survived were scattered, so that no two of them were left together. Interesting. Now, this is the people of Jabesh Gilead. Why was it that they could not rise up to fight themselves against the Ammonites? Why were they in such, what's the word I'm looking for? At such a disadvantage? Well, consider this for a moment. Saul is the first what of Israel? First king. So prior to the kings, who were in places or positions of leadership? The judges. How does the book of Judges end? What is the last verse? Say it loud.
Everyone did what they thought was right in their own eyes.
Everyone did what was right in their own eyes because there was no king. What is that last event that we read about in the book of Judges where it says, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes because there was no king? What's the last event? So we're putting some things together here so that we can see why the people of Jabesh Gilead were so diminished. You really have to take it back all the way to chapter 19. Let me summarize it for you very quickly. So, a certain Levite was coming to let's look at chapter 19, the first part of it. They were coming in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim. He took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. So, he's going his way. Let's see. I think I'm going back too far. Yeah, let's move ahead a little bit further than that. All right, let's have a look at verse 13.
What?
Excuse me, still 19, sorry. It's chapter 19 and verse 13 of Judges. So this man is saying to his young man, the Levite, come and let us draw near to one of the places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near where? Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Well, it ends up resulting that an old man comes back home from the fields, sees this man in the town, in the city gate, and says, why are you spending the night here? Come and stay with me. Well, we learn that, let's move ahead to verse 22. As they were making their hearts merry, so this man and his concubine are guests at this person's house, the men of the city, who were worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. They said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house that we may know him. Sounds a lot like what? Sodom and Gomorrah, which was back in Abraham's day, and Lot. But here we are, some 600 or 700 years later, after Sodom and Gomorrah, and we've got the men of this city, coming, and they want this guest of the city who's come for refuge, for safety. And the men of the city want him to come out. Give him to us so that we may have our way with him. Remember, this is during the time of the judges, and everyone did what? It was right in their own eyes.
This guy does the same thing that Lot did.
Yeah. Well, as a result of that, they did put out his concubine, and the men of the city ravaged her all night long, and she was left for dead, and she died on the doorstep of the man's house. So that when this Levite went to leave in the morning, he told her to get up, and she was already dead. Well, we're not going to get into all of the details of it because it is pretty gruesome about what's taking place, but this is in Benjamin, in Gibeah. All right? What connection do we have that we've been looking at to Gibeah? Saul, the son of Kish, is from Gibeah. That's where his palace is. That's where his headquarters is. It's Gibeah. Saul of Gibeah. Well, when word of this goes throughout the entire land, everybody from the north to the south, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, they came together and they came to fight against the people of Gibeah, these Benjamites. And as a result of this, the Benjamites were defeated by the other 11 tribes. It was a terrible civil war. And there were 600 men of the Benjamites left. Well, the rest of the tribes, they were mourning and grieving the fact that one of their tribes was almost obliterated. And now, what are we going to do? We've all taken an oath that we're not going to give any of our daughters in marriage to them. So how are we going to get them to be built back up again to repopulate? Well, the question was, who of the tribes did not come to bring vengeance upon this tribe of Benjamin? And what was the town that the people of what place had not come up? Say again? The people of Jabesh had not come up. So now they're being punished, so that in chapter 21, in verse 8, to find out that it's the ones that didn't come were from Jabesh Gilead. So they said, they sent 12,000 of their bravest men and commanded them, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, so that all the women and little ones, the ones that everyone who had been with a man, that they're to be put to the sword. So that the only ones left alive in Jabesh Gilead were 400 women who were virgins. So Jabesh Gilead was decimated. And so they became wives of these remaining few decimated of the tribe of Benjamin. Well, eventually, they began to repopulate, and Jabesh Gilead began to get a little bit more in their population. So they went from a population of 400, now they build back up again, because many of them would have gone back to the tribe of Benjamin in the south. Because Jabesh Gilead, remember where we saw it? Was in the middle northern part of the land of Israel, near the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. So they were diminished severely. And they were diminished because of the sin of the men of Gibeah. Interesting that the sin of the men of Gibeah caused the diminishing of the people of Jabesh Gilead. And now, the one who was the head of the kingdom, of the nation, was from Gibeah, Saul. And the people of Jabesh Gilead rised up with valiant hearts to retrieve his body, to preserve the honor of the Lord and the dignity of the nation. And partly because of what had happened some 35 or so years earlier, when Saul had come to their rescue when they were being afflicted. All right, that brings us to 2 Samuel in chapter 1. Saul is now dead. And David returns from striking down, look at verse 1. He returns from striking down whom? The Amalekites. So after he struck down the Amalekites, he remained where? Ziklag for how long? 2 days. And on the third day, a man came from Saul's camp. All right, so let's stop there for a moment. Remember our timeline? While Saul was engaged in a battle with the Philistines, David had been engaged in a battle with the people of the nation of Amalek, the Amalekites. David returns back home after that victory. And after 2 days, he remained in Ziklag for 2 days back home. And on the third day, there's news that Saul is dead. So on the third day, a man came from Saul's camp, and he's going to bring news that Saul is dead. It's kind of a picture of the cross, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the Amalekites were destroyed, okay? Those that represented the enemies of God. Saul was a picture of the flesh, the man of the flesh. So when Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, it was a demonstration that sin was conquered. It was conquered on the first day, on the cross. Was it finished? But it was demonstrated with verifiable proof, or proof that could not be denied, through his resurrection, that the flesh now has been defeated. So that now we can walk by the Spirit instead of by the flesh. That's what the resurrection speaks to us of, isn't it? So on the third day, he gets word that Saul is dead. The third day representing the resurrection. On the third day, word is brought that the flesh is defeated. Now, was the flesh defeated on the third day? No. The flesh was defeated 3 days earlier, right? Saul didn't die the day the man brought the news. Saul died 3 days earlier. It's a picture of the cross. The flesh was defeated at the cross, and the news was proclaimed that the flesh was defeated. Saul is dead on the third day. All right, so let's pick this up. Let's take it from verse 2 down to 10. Carolyn, we got a bit of a passage.
John didn't read it.
Pardon me?
John hasn't read it.
John hasn't read yet? Sorry, I jumped ahead. All right,
Start at 2.
2 Samuel, chapter 1, verses 2 to 10.
Oh, please. It came even to pass on the 3rd day that behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent and earth upon his head. And so it was, when he came to David, that he fell to the earth and did obedience. And David said unto him, From whence comest thou? And he said unto him, Out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said unto him, How went the matter? I pray thee to tell me. And he answered, That the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also fallen and dead. And Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. And David said unto the young man and that told him, How knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? And the young man that told him said, I happened by chance upon the Mount Gilboa. Behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and the horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me and called upon me and answered, Here I am. And I said unto me,
He said,
and he said unto me, Who art thou? And I answered him, And I am a Amalekite.
Yeah.
And he said unto me again, Stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me, for anguish is come upon me, because of my life is yet whole in me. So I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head, and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them either unto my Lord.
all right. What's one of the big problems going on here? Obviously, Saul is dead. That's a problem. Okay, but what's one of the big problems with this man and his account of what's going on? It's not the same as the last chapter. What's the difference?
So, this man says he killed him.
All right. So that's where some change has taken place. Which is right? The first one's right? Pardon me? The last chapter. So chapter 31, we're taking as, so that's the right account? You believe so?
I think they will.
Okay. You think they both are?
Yeah, just one saw it one way, the other one saw it the other.
All right, one's seeing it one way, the other one's seeing it another. Well, they can't die two different ways. You can only
No.
die one.
Comment,
So,
comment.
go ahead.
The account at the end of 1 Samuel doesn't say anything about so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that. It said, this is what happened. This dude is laying claim that he did this, he did that. He's looking for a reward
Why is, how do you figure he's looking for a reward?
because he thinks he's gonna get favor from David for taking up Saul.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
And
why
he's got a
you're
surprise
going.
coming.
Yeah, he's got a sorry surprise coming. Okay, yes, he figures.
He's an Amalekite. He did so.
All right, so that's the other thing I wanted to bring to her. Say that again?
He's an Amalekite, but David just came back from defeating.
All right, so this is a stray Amalekite.
He missed one.
How somehow he wasn't at the battle that David had pursued the rest of his clan with. So whether he was one that took off or he was just off on another area,
He's a
whatever.
young man though, so he may not have even been battle age yet.
Exactly. So here's this young man happens upon the battlefield. And somehow he gets to Saul's body before the Philistines get there, or he hears word of what's taken place, and he, from the bounty that other battles have secured because of the Amalekites' numerous battles, Perhaps he took what did he say? Here is, I brought what was on his arm, and I took the crown that was on his head. Perhaps he just took a crown from bounty that had been in the Amalekite treasure trove and an armlet and said, here. We don't know exactly how it took place, but we know that his account is false. It's not true. First Chronicles chapter 10 gives us the account once again of Saul's death. And when we read about his death there, it says that, I'll just read it to you. You're welcome to turn there. First Chronicles chapter 10. It says that it's almost word for word of 1 Samuel 31. Philistines fought against Israel. The men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. They overtook Saul and his sons, and they struck down Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua, the sons of Saul. Archers found their mark on Saul. Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword. Does it sound vaguely familiar to what 1 Samuel 31 is telling us? But his armor bearer would not, because he feared greatly. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. When his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his own sword. And then continues to tell us that, of course, they died, and everybody abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. So it's basically a carbon copy of chapter 31.
Yeah.
So here we've got this young man coming, figuring, I have just struck it rich. I get to be the one. If I get there quick enough, before anyone else, I'll have news of Saul's death, and there's got to be a reward for that. Because David, everybody knows that Saul has been hot on his heels for 10 years or more. So when he comes, he brings this account that Saul fell at this young man's hands. Although he was wounded, he does say he was wounded, but then he takes credit for his death, not telling that he fell on his own sword, but saying that stand by me and kill me. So I took the, where are we? Verse 10. I stood beside him and killed him. So he doesn't indicate specifically how that happened, but he takes the credit completely. That Saul is now dead. He was fatally wounded, but I took his life. So whether or not, as far as David was concerned, whether or not this man was telling the truth, it didn't matter. This man was laying claim to have killed the king, the Lord's anointed. Remember, David's comment to his own men was, I will not lay my hands upon the Lord's anointed. And in so speaking, he's saying, and you are not to lay your hands on him either. The Lord will take care of him. The Lord will bring him out in his time. He'll bring me in his time. Well, this young man, comes taking credit for it. So David, one more thing I want us to see, that a man, in verse 12, he comes with his clothes torn and dirt on his head.
Yeah.
Pardon me? Isn't that what I said? I'm sorry. Thank you. Verse 2. He had come with, it's the third day, a man comes from Saul's camp, clothes are torn, dirt on his head. So think of these details together. Remember, I'd spoken about the third day speaks of the resurrection. What does this man demonstrate? Remember, the Amalekites, they were to be defeated by the people of Israel as well. The Lord said, you will have victory over the Amalekites. This man comes, and he's got what on his head? Dirt. And what about his clothes? Torn. What does dirt represent on the head? Why do they put dirt on the head? Mourning, but more than that. Yes, you're right. But there's more to it than that.
Is it a battle?
He was in a battle? Not necessarily. Good guess, though. This was a time of mourning for the dead. All right? And so in mourning for the dead, they would put dirt on their heads, representative of the grave. So, with this anguish of soul is what this is to represent, and the ripping of the clothes. So the dirt on the head represents the grave, the ripping of the clothes. When we're talking about the third day, the resurrection, put it together with death, ripped, something ripped, ripped clothes, and the grave. We've got the grave, dust on the head. We've got the ripped clothes, which represents the, what is it? The curtain, the ripped curtain in the temple. Ripped in two from top to bottom. And the third day, of course, speaks of news that the flesh has been defeated, destroyed, overcome. All right, let's pick it up in verse 11. Let's go to verse 16.
Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who brought him the report, Where are you from? I am the son of an alien and an Amalekite, he answered. David asked him, Why were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Then David called one of his men and said, Go strike him down. So he struck him down, and he died. For David had said to him, Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, I killed the Lord's anointed.
So we see yet another aspect of the Amalekites. One more has gone to the ground. But also demonstrating that man is not to presume to come up and touch the Lord's anointed. Now, one thing we need to be careful of. There's been an abuse of this passage where there will be preachers that will say, do not speak a word against me, because the scriptures say, do not touch the Lord's anointed and do his prophets no harm. So they'll say, so you are not to speak a word against me because I am the Lord's anointed. So in other words, my teachings, my doctrines, my dealings, whatever, my lifestyle is untouchable because I'm the Lord's anointed. Don't touch the Lord's anointed. So they use that as a threat that you're not. So if you hear that, if you hear somebody speaking that about themselves or to try to endorse another, be careful, be alert, because quite often that's a smokescreen to cover up some shady stuff, some unbiblical, ungodly ways. Nevertheless, we need to be careful that we don't speak against those who are the Lord's anointed. Who are the Lord's anointed? We all are. We need to guard our mouths and our attitudes towards others, because we're all God's anointed, aren't we? By the Spirit of Christ.
Does this also not point, and this convicts me, say this, but Saul was the king of the nation, and we have current leadership government for our country and leader, and does that not imply the same weight that even though I personally might not like that gentleman, he's put there by God, and it's not up to me to speak down of that, let alone do anything physically. Is there not a parallel there?
Okay, yeah, there is a parallel there. We need to be alert, though. That doesn't mean that we can't speak with righteous indignation or truth about things that are being done wrongly or in a manner that is ungodly, where righteousness is not being pursued. So it doesn't mean we can't deal with that or address it, but it means that we got to be careful that we don't slander or speak down. Both Peter and Paul tell us to pray for those who are in authority over us, to be in obedience to kings, because God has put them in place. And Paul, who's writing this, and Peter, who's writing this, in that day, who was the king? Caesar. And specifically, when Paul's writing it, which Caesar was king? Nero, one of the worst Caesars that there was. Like, if we think we've got it bad, like, Nero made it look, makes our leadership, whether present or past, recent or a generation or two ago, doesn't matter how bad our leaders have been throughout the history of our nation, they don't even come close. All the worst ones put together probably don't come close to Nero. Yet the scripture tells us to pray for them, to honor the king. So in that respect, we've got to be careful in the way that we conduct ourselves, not to slander or speak evil against them. Can you speak truth about the evil that they are perpetrating, if that's the case? Yes, but we need to be careful that we're doing it in a manner that's not to slander or to demean the person. So in our anger, do not sin. And it doesn't mean that we can't vote. We are to vote. So it doesn't mean we can't vote when the time comes, but we need to do it through the means that are provided for us in our democracy, in our governance, to deal with those. So God will deal with it in their time. We cast the vote, but its every outcome is in the Lord's hands, right? So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, for bringing that to our attention. All right, let's finish off tonight by ending this chapter and look at David's attitude and response to Saul and Jonathan's death. Look at verse 17 and 18.
He was very hurt.
All right, so we're at Johnny.
David took up this lament concerning Saul and his sons Jonathan, and ordered that the men of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen.
All right, and so he goes on. Interesting that David is composing a song now of lament because the king is fallen. Song of lament over the king and his good friend, his best friend, Jonathan. If you were to go to Israel today and you were to ask anyone that grew up in Israel, that went through their school system, can you tell me 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 17 and onwards, verses 19 and onwards? Can you tell me that? Tell me about it? They'd look at you weirdly, first of all, because in the Hebrew Bible, there's not a 1 and 2 Samuel. So they'd be wondering, what do you mean 2 Samuel? But if you were to ask them, tell me about the song of lament that David composed for Saul and Jonathan. Can you bring that up? Next slide, please. I think there's a few of them. Just one sec. I think it's stop there. Maybe click it once more. Back. It's not coming. All right, how about I do it this way for you? For some reason, that's not coming up.
דמעותיך חלף, איך נפלו גיבורים, אל תגידו בגת, אל תבשרו בחוצות אשקלון,
You hear Ashkelon? And look in verse 20.
ותשמחנה בנות פלישתים,
Philistine is Philistines.
ותעלוזנה בנות הערבים, הרי בגלבוע,
Verse 21, Gilboa.
על טל ועל מטר עליכם, שדה תרומות, כי שם נגאל מגן גיבורים,
And so it continues.
מגן שאול.
Sounds very,
Yeah, because it's a lament. So if you were to ask somebody in Israel that have gone through the school system, in public school in the early grades, they learn this song. So they can sing it for you, or if they're not singers, they will recite it for you. So that every Jew that has gone through the Jewish school system can recite this lament from heart. It's interesting that they're taught this for one who was such an ungodly man. But they're expressing the heart of one who was godly in reference to Saul, because David was a man after God's heart, who sought to know the heart of God, and that he wasn't being vindictive towards his enemies. David was being one who was looking to be a peacekeeper and a peacemaker.
Says, I do not delight in the death.
So, all right, say that again.
God says he does not delight in the death of the wicked.
I do not delight in the death of the wicked. So this is the declaration that the Lord gives, and David shares that. He's not delighting in Saul's death, even though he was a wicked king, a fleshly king. He had a few bright moments, a few good moments, but for the better part of the last 10 to 15 years of his reign, it was a reign of terror. And that's why the nation basically fell into a place of weakness, because it was all by the flesh. And the Philistines began to penetrate and permeate throughout the land. Can I show you one more thing? Remember, the Philistines had brought the bodies of Saul and his sons to Beth Shemesh. Turn with me one last time before we finish to Judges chapter 1. To Judges chapter 1.
One picture?
Judges 1, we're going to look at verses 27 to 28. All right. Manasseh.
Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan and his villages, or Tanakh and his villages, and the inhabitants of Dor and his villages, or the inhabitants of Ivan and his villages, the inhabitants of
Megiddo.
Megiddo and his villages, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. When Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely.
When the people of Israel were brought into the land of Canaan, they were given a promise. And what was that promise? That they would drive out the inhabitants of the land, but not because of their own strength, but because the Lord was going before them. Yet there were times when the people of Israel said, we can't do this because they have iron chariots? Or why is it that we're being given the hill country? It's too hard for us. The terrain is too difficult. But Joshua would encourage them and say, put your trust in the Lord, and he will destroy your enemies. But there came a point after Joshua's death, as they continued to spread throughout the land, that we read of those places that the people of Israel were not able to drive out. Why were they not able to drive them out?
Fine.
Stop trying. Stop trusting. Yeah, the trusting resulted in them not trying. They weren't able to accomplish what God had promised them because they stopped trusting the Lord. Because after, in the first part of verse 1, chapter 1, after the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up and fight for us against the Canaanites, to fight against them? And so they went, and as the Lord had given them direction to do so. But we read of the fact that after Joshua had passed away and the elders after him, that there rose up a generation that did not know God of Israel. And so they ended up going about things in their own flesh. They stopped trusting. And so they couldn't find victory. And so we read very specifically here in verse 27 that Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan. So the Canaanites remained there. Although they put them to forced labor, that's not what God told them to do. He said to drive them out. And had they driven them out, there quite likely would not have been a temple to Ashtaroth on or in Bethshan for the Philistines to come and nail the bodies of Saul and his sons to. So as we seek after God's heart, he wants us not only for our own sakes, but also for the sakes of our families and those generations would come after us. That we would leave a legacy. And the legacy is not how much money we made or what kind of a fame we ended up developing for ourselves, but what faith did we live and leave for those that came behind us. Now, I don't think we have many more days, many more months or years even to continue on, to leave a legacy, because I believe the Lord is about to come back any moment. But for as long as we're here, let us be faithful, pursuing God's heart and passing on that legacy to everyone we interact with, so that it will not be said of us that they could not conquer Bethshan or this high place in our own lives. But the Lord was victorious in their lives because they put their trust in him, and they did not follow after the flesh, but after the Spirit of the living God.